My friends, and it just happened again. This is the third video in a row where we've had an eviction and a tenant has moved back in over the weekend. My friends, this is why it's important to work with professionals like Bita, one of our favorite paralegals, right after the intro. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite paralegal in all of the land, Bita. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Gary. How are you?
I am excellent. So here's what I love, my friends. We sent messages to each other last night, and all I got back from Bita was, oh boy, do I have a story for you. And I haven't heard it yet. So when our viewers hear it, I'll be hearing it for the first time. Do we want to jump into it or what?
Let's do it. So last week exactly on Tuesday. So not this Tuesday that had passed, the week before. Okay. So we had an eviction. There was a property in Barrie that the tenants who were on the lease actually were evicted. What they had done was that they had rented the basement to some individuals. Okay. And we'll refer to these individuals as unauthorized occupants, because they were not tenants, so they were not paying the rent directly to the landlord, and therefore they were not protected under the act. So when we enforced an eviction, the entire property was evicted because the lease was in the name of the OG, the original tenant, right? The sheriff arrived on Tuesday. They evicted everybody from the property. And then on Wednesday morning, the landlord, who was our client, went to the property just to do a walk around. And he said, it looks like the back door, the basement was a walkout basement. So it looks like the back door of the walkout basement was broken into. And he goes, there's a big dog in the property because I can see it, and I'm not going in. So he contacted the Barrie police, right? Because that's the division who governs the area. And Barrie police arrived on scene, but they would not remove these unauthorized occupants, even after a court order. So they contacted us, and I said, no, these are not, they're not protected under the acts. The order, and it's specific. When you have a court order, the court order says that the sheriff is to remove the tenants and all occupants. Well, this officer gave his legal opinion, which actually means nothing because, you're not authorized to give your legal opinion because you're not licensed. You're not a legal representative. And the job of the police is to keep the peace. Well, firstly, these guys had not only returned to the property, they broke into the property. Yeah. So they're not only unauthorized unauthorized occupants. There was a criminal behavior that took place, and, they broke into the property. It's break and enter. But that officer refused to remove them. So we had contacted the desk sergeant, and who, with our luck, was not available. And the officer on duty said that this particular officer had instructed all the officers in the office not to remove these unauthorized occupants.
You're kidding.
I wish I was. They would not remove these unauthorized occupants, which is very scary because there's a court order to do so. And luckily, they were just removed this Tuesday because the sheriff would actually follow through with the eviction and actually evicted everybody, including the unauthorized occupants. And we finally got a hold of her. She contacted Barrie police and she said, no, there's a court order and you guys cannot provide, your legal opinion. Your legal opinion or your beliefs or whatever mean nothing. You have to remove these unauthorized occupants.
Wow.
And they were removed on Tuesday.
Yeah. So there's There's a lot to unpack there. So give us kind of like in layman's terms, if you will, the difference between, say, a sheriff's jurisdictional responsibility versus the police officer that got called out. Just kind of explain what that difference is in this perspective. Okay, sorry, my friends. I had to change cameras. We're all good. This is the fun thing that we get to do when we're on location or we're out on the road and we have to do these things on the fly. However, it's important, I think, Bita, to understand what the difference is between, say, a sheriff's responsibilities and, as an example, the police officer. So give us in layman's terms what that difference is.
So, Gary, the sheriff carries through or enforces the eviction. So the sheriff is the one that shows up at the property on the day of the eviction, posts a notice of vacant possession, knocks on the door and tells the tenants, grab whatever you need. You have 10 minutes. The locks are being changed. You are being evicted. That's the role of the sheriff. Once the locks are changed and the property is secure, on to the next property for eviction. The role of the police in Canada's judicial system is basically to keep the peace. To keep the peace, make sure that people are not engaging in criminal activity or criminal behavior, and not give their legal opinion. They cannot give their legal opinion. And I understand that officers know bits and pieces of different types of laws, but this specific officer did not. He didn't know anything about the Residential Tenancies Act, and during my conversation with him, when I was trying to tell him, I guess he thought, she's working for the landlord, so maybe she won't even tell me the hard truth. But nonetheless, he's not licensed to provide his legal opinion. Even after being told by the sheriff or the sheriff's office that, yes, these people were evicted, the sheriff would not have carried out an eviction if they thought that the people who were in the basement, the unauthorized occupants, were actually tenants. Because the sheriff don't have the authority to do that. They can only evict per the court order. Now, luckily, when we tried again, a new officer appeared on site a week after, and he said, no, I have to carry through the court order.
Yeah, that's interesting because we often think it's one of the same, right? Sheriff, police officer, it's the same person or same jurisdiction, same responsibilities, and well, in fact, it's not. It is not, and that's why it's so important to have the right people on your team. But of course,
Absolutely.
of course.
Absolutely.
So interesting note, and I think maybe we should circle back to the unauthorized tenant, and just so people have
Occupant.
occupant. Thank you. See, even I said it wrong, and that's just because that's the way we've been taught in a sense. But they are not a tenant. They are an occupant who is not allowed to be there. So explain how that comes to be and the different path that one would take to remove them in a sense.
So an unauthorized occupant is somebody who's brought in without the knowledge or permission of the landlord, usually by the tenant or a tenant. Okay. And if they become unauthorized, usually, and when it comes to light of the landlord finding out, they're usually unauthorized because the landlord finds out that they've been there once the original tenant has moved out. And these people have now been left behind. And although these unauthorized occupants may think that they have a tenancy, in fact, they do not, because they could have a tenancy with the original tenant, but not with the landlord. However, for a landlord to move forward with an eviction, they have to file an application for unauthorized occupants. They have to do that within 60 days of finding out that these people are unauthorized to be there, because that's the board's requirement. And then they have to wait, go through a lengthy board system. And then they have to prove to the board that, in fact, these people who are there are not authorized to be there.
So what I'm hearing is, yeah, that there's a whole can of worms when all of that happens. But my friends, make sure you are checking up on your property so you at least,
Yeah.
if it happens, right? And as opposed to, yeah, they've been in there for the last, 12 months or so. You've got to have somebody checking up on your property, and just for that very simple reason. Um, how
I'm
are
glad
I get?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the questions I get asked is, how do you know if there are people living there?
Yeah,
Well, just like you said, regular inspections. Now, I'm not saying go there every month, no, because then that'll be harassment and interference. But every 6 months, it's reasonable to go by just to inspect, to make sure all the smoke alarms work, the fire detector works, the furnace filters are changed, regular routine maintenance. You'll find out a lot of things when you go by just for that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if you've got a property manager or friends that live in the area, they don't have to walk into the home, but a drive by, a little
Yeah.
stop, little look to make sure. There's some telltale signs, like instead of 2 garbage bins, there's 8 garbage bins or something
There
silly
you go.
like that, right? Have a look at some of that stuff. And sometimes it's best to go talk to the neighbors as well, right? If you're really curious, or what's the word I'm looking for? You think something's happening under your nose that you're not aware of, right?
Yeah, your neighbors are definitely your eyes when you're not there,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Typically they have an invested interest in what's happening in your home,
Yeah,
right?
especially if they live next door, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've gotten a few calls from neighbors, and it's been, as much as I didn't want to get the call, it's been a good call, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
and that's a good point too, right? We always think we're kind of in this alone as property investors or as landlords. Go introduce yourself to the neighbors, because they will keep an eye on that home for you, whether just being neighborly in a sense, right? Because what happens in that home affects the neighborhood from positive and negative perspectives, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The neighbors are a good source, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So it's funny. Every time we jump on one of our calls, we always seem to learn about, nope, tenant moved back in or somebody moved back in. It's obviously going pretty rampant right now in our industry. But to me, it makes that's where we got to dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure we're working with the right people. And yes, sometimes we get hurdles thrown in our way with people move back in and a police officer says it's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and you know what I think happened? I think this officer, he arrived at the property. His intention was to keep the peace and remove these people. But I think when he saw what was going on, the lady was a single mother. There was some mental health issues, and I think he let his emotions influence what he's supposed to do, his job, right?
Hmm.
And there's going to be some serious consequences, because the landlord is the one that incurred costs and damages.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And we understand, like, everyone has their own journey and things like that. However, how we treat our properties and our tenants, which are, I always look at this, and maybe you agree with me. If you don't, I'm happy to hear it too. Obviously the home or the property is an asset, that's an investment. But who takes care of that home is actually, to me, sometimes the bigger asset, or our partner. And we see the banks are our partners, but I think, great tenants are our partners, right? And having that great asset, that's who's going to take care of the home, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, Gary, 95% of headaches can be eliminated or dodged at the initial vetting process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? And there are good tenants. I've had great tenants, right? I've only in my career, or the last 20 years since I've been a landlord, I just encountered one headache of a tenant. So there are great tenants out there. You just need to vet them properly. But
Yeah.
even when you vet them properly, if their circumstances change, if they get sick and they're not able to work, if they associate with the wrong people, and they bring in the wrong people into the property, things can go wrong, and it affects the tenancy, it affects the property.
Yeah, and that's
Right?
probably a great segue into maybe one of our future videos is not necessarily how to vet people, but things perhaps we should be asking and looking out for, and maybe some red flags or even the green flags, right? The opposite. Yeah, this is the one that I want. So I think from
Yeah.
your perspective, that'll be a great conversation. But remind us how to get a hold of you.
Absolutely. You can head over to our website. You can book a discovery call on there, stonegate.legalservices.ca. All our contact information is there. And as always, you can follow us on Instagram, Stonegate Legal at Stonegate's Legal Services, or on Facebook, Stonegate Legal Services.
There you have it, my friend. So do follow her on Instagram. One of my favorite feeds, in fact. That's Bita DeLisi. I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next video. Goodbye for now.
Bye for now.
Excellent. Thank you for staying with me on that one. Yeah.